Claire, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for taking the time.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm actually honoured that you asked me and very happy to chat with you.
Thank you so much. So I always like to kind of start from square one and find out about early life. So what was your early life like growing up?
Well, for me, I was born into a normal Catholic family. I'm the eldest of 9 children, and my parents, we used to live. We lived. I grew up initially in the third largest city in Victoria, called Ballarat, and we lived not very far away from the local Catholic church, which was actually an old monastery. And we used to just be a normal Catholic family, so we would go to church on Sundays, Easter, Christmas, and say grace before and after meals, and that was it. Then, when I was like four and a half, my mum met an older priest, and he did not like the changes in the church that had occurred from the 1962 Second Vatican Council. He had believed that those changes went way too far. The church was too modern, and it had lost its identity of holding up tradition and all the smells and bells of Catholicism and the rituals and all of that. So my mum, who had actually been a nun before she got married, she she basically left well, she was told by her superiors to leave the convent because she'd come out in psoriasis all around her head. And back in the 60s, it was considered a sign of God that if you had anything like that, it was like a sign of God that you didn't have a vocation anymore. So she was asked to leave. And it was only as I was growing up and sort of noticed it a bit more, mum really liked she liked the quiet solitude, she liked the meditating, she liked the praying, she liked all those old beliefs and rituals and prayers of old Catholicism. But when she met Father Cummins and he said this, it really fulfilled a need in her. Like, it was familiar. She didn't have to change. She could just go back to what she knew rather than actually learn something new and sort of roll with the punches or roll with the changes that were happening. So I was four and a half, and I was playing one day with my siblings. I was dressed in red tartan overalls. I was very proud of those red tartan overalls. And mum came in, and she had a skirt in her hand, and she said, "You need to change." And I'm thinking, I'm already dressed, so why do I need to change? And mum said, "No, we're going to see a priest. Um, you need to change into a skirt." And in my own, 4.5-year-old brain, I'm thinking, why do I need to change? I'm already dressed. And then she said to me, "You need to either take off the pants and put on the skirt, or you wear the skirt over the pants." And so I was a little bit willful. And so I thought, well, I'm not going to give her the satisfaction of actually taking off the pants. I'm going to put the skirt over the pants. So I did that. But then it was only when I was sitting in the car, and I remember sitting there and thinking, wonder what people are going to think of my weird outfit. Um, but that was the beginning of the change, because from that time on, there was only four of us at the time. So there was myself, then my brother, and then there were twins, a boy and a girl. And mum got rid of all the jeans, all the pants, all the t-shirts. And for my sister and I, we had to be covered down up to our necks, down to our elbows and below our knees. We needed to wear a scarf, head covering in church. And when the TV blew up, mum wouldn't let dad change it, or like get a new one. She wouldn't allow that. Later on, so that was late 1974, early 75. And then by 1977, they'd bought a 20-acre property half an hour out of Ballarat, whereby mum then decided to homeschool us. So we were homeschooled without a television, without any outside influences, and mum kept a strict hold on what we were learning, what we were reading, and we would only associate with other kids our age when we travelled 2 hours one way to attend the mass said in Latin every week.
What were your parents like towards you?
Well, mum was very strict. She was very strict and domineering. She wasn't very loving
Yeah.
because it was more a case of spare the rod, spoil the child.
Yeah.
She just wasn't a very loving mother. She's quite, knowing what I know now, she's narcissistic,
Yeah.
she's manipulative, and I do believe that she's probably on the autism spectrum.
Yeah.
Um,
That
my
must have been
dad,
so difficult for you growing up with parents like with a mom like that and so
mm,
isolated from other children.
well, yeah, because I didn't know. It wasn't until probably 30 years later that really I really wanted to have a mum like I saw my peers' mums, but I never had that. My dad was different. My dad had never been he'd never been like really open with his emotions because it wasn't really the generation for that. Like we knew dad loved us and he also did not agree with mum homeschooling us. Many times he went out the front door and he'd go, "Send the kids to the local school, Kathleen," because he'd say, "Oh, it's only 3 miles down the road." And she'd be like, "No, no." And, she'd just keep us at home. But dad was always one to actually be with people. And I guess as I have grown older, I've noticed, and especially in the last 10 years, I'm much more like dad than I am than like my mum. Like dad recently was awarded a medal for 55 years voluntary service for the Country Fire Authority. So dad's that kind of person. He wants to go out and volunteer his time and make a difference in the world. And that's me, only I've taken it to another level.
Do you feel that your
But
mum
mum,
was in complete control over your father?
yeah, she was. And and it's been sad to see, for me to understand it more as I got older. It's very sad to see dad stifled.
Yeah.
Um, but we always knew that dad loved us. Now I know, in saying that I was brought up isolated and insular, it, many people can say, "Oh, it was a terrible childhood." It wasn't. The only bad part about it was that we were indoctrinated
Yeah.
and, we didn't learn a lot of the social cues and we were backward socially and educationally. But on the other hand, though, I mean, we learnt a lot of very practical skills. We could milk cows and goats, we can round up sheep, shear them, we can fix fences, you know,
Yeah.
we can make butter, pretty much bake bread. We can do all of these other things, which
Yeah.
is pretty wonderful, especially in a time of COVID,
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but yeah, so that's how I grew up. Then when I was about 15 and a half, my mum, she did like to have people come and stay for extended periods of time. Dad did not. He didn't mind people visiting for up to a week. He didn't mind that at all. But staying on longer than that, he didn't like it. Mum did like to have people stay. And there was a guy that she'd actually, well, we kind of knew him. He'd been to the seminary a few years beforehand and then left through ill health. And he came to stay at the house. And that ended up in being later on being my husband. It was my first husband. So I only discovered actually just before my TEDx talk in Melbourne in 2018 that, from someone who reconnected with me after 40 years, that my first husband had actually had intentions, like he groomed me. He was literally looking for a teenage bride to groom the way he wanted. I mean, clearly I didn't know that because I was not exposed to anything with which to be able to have that knowledge.
Yeah, yeah, you couldn't have had any information to be able to question his behavior.
We didn't watch TV. We had no access to magazines. We had no access to any like romance novels or anything like that. I had literally
Yeah,
no idea. I was also taught growing up to be a nice girl, to
yeah,
be submissive,
yeah,
because real Catholic girls were being real Catholic girls were quiet. They
yeah,
didn't talk very much. They didn't have opinions. it was all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, my mum was right there when he was saying to me, "Oh, you know, you talk too loud, you laugh too
Yeah.
much, you shouldn't cross your legs because ladies don't sit with their legs crossed." There was all this, you know, and yet my mum was there and she didn't do anything whatsoever to say leave her alone or
Yeah.
let her be her own person.
Yeah, and with a narcissistic mom, she's not going to have the empathy to be able to feel that actually something is wrong in that situation and have the instinct to protect her
Mm,
daughter. And also with a narcissistic mom, you're going to have been told you were wrong all of the time and be very much be made feel that you weren't good enough. So then actually
yeah.
being able to say no or having the self-esteem to say no in situations, I mean, it sounds like you were completely powerless.
Well, see, I didn't have any self-esteem or any self-confidence either. I had none of that whatsoever. And I didn't even know what those words, I wouldn't have even known what those words meant if I'd known about them. I
Yeah,
really wouldn't have. I was that socially and educationally naive. I
yeah.
really didn't have any idea of what that would mean. Because if someone had said to me when I was 17 about self-esteem, it would have gone literally over the top of my head. I
Yeah.
would not have had any idea whatsoever what it meant.
Was there a lot of sexual abuse that you experienced with that man?
No, I didn't experience sexual abuse at all. Um, there was a lot of other, well, I didn't understand that until much, much later, that there was other abuse, you know, like
Yeah.
spiritual abuse, financial abuse, social abuse, emotional abuse. Um, there was all of those abuses, but
Yeah.
not sexual abuse.
Yeah. So what happened with that relationship? At what point did you end up marrying him?
Well, I was 18 and a half when we got married, and we ended up by living initially in Melbourne and for a few years. So I'd had 5 children, and one had passed away through heart and kidney disease. And it was when I was pregnant with my 5th child that my first husband decided that he didn't want to live in Melbourne anymore. Because he'd had a belief in the end of world beliefs,
Yeah.
the end of world theories, and he in the back of the Bible, you've got like the apocalypse or revelation, whichever one, yeah, it can be called either one. And it was, and so they can be very much open to interpretation.
Yeah.
And he was wanting to know, he was bound and determined to know that, like, he believed that there was more to it. There had to be someone in the world that would have, how can I say, like inside information,
Yeah.
the background story, so to speak. And so that's when he went searching, and through someone that we had once known, he learnt about the guy called the Little Pebble, who was a supposed seer living on the south coast of New South Wales. And he and Tony decided that he didn't want to live in Melbourne anymore. He wanted to take us and live, up there.
So how did you feel about these theories that your husband believed in?
Well, the thing is that I had grown up with it to a degree, that the world was going to end in the year 2000. So it wasn't alien to me, but also by the same token, like when I was very young, I'd grown up with that. But then there were some priests that came along and they denounced it. And so it wasn't, so my parents had stopped believing in that. So I'd kind of just thrown it away and not sort of thought about it anymore. But then when I discovered that he believed in it, it made me feel quite anxious, because he had picked up different, how can I say, supposed messages from the Virgin Mary from various places, which described, ironically enough, something not a virus like COVID, but a situation like that, a situation where we would all be in lockdown and
Yeah.
there would be armies on the streets literally forcing us to stay in our homes. And if we did not comply, we would have services cut off and food cut off. So basically, so it was very, so when he sort of came in with those new beliefs, or, the upgraded beliefs, I suppose you could say, it was very scary. Like for me, I got very anxious. Again, I did not understand. I did not know that it was called anxiety. I just called it being nervous.
Right.
But now I understand. Now that I understand mental health a lot more, I was very, very anxious.
So you felt these feelings, knew that you didn't feel right, didn't feel okay, but couldn't really use that anxiety. You were kind of tell what the anxiety was really about.
No, it would just be that whenever anybody mentioned anything about the world ending or anything like that, I could feel this knot in my stomach and be really anxious. But I also felt powerless. I didn't know that I could change it or that I could even question it.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So your body was telling you like something is wrong in my relationship, like I'm in danger. I need to flee. I need to try and get out. And your body was giving a very strong signal, but because of the way that you were brought up and your emotions not being responded to in your home environment, that actually just knowing how to use those emotions to guide you was impossible for you.
Yeah, exactly. Honestly, it wasn't until like probably 10, 12 years ago that I really started to connect the mind body and, the psychological with the physical and the emotional. I just didn't get that because I'd been, I was really naive. I was really innocent and just ignorant to all of that.
Yeah, I'm sure all of your emotions have been shut down as a child, and you were probably, if you ever mentioned an emotion, you were probably told to just behave, and it was swept under the carpet. So, what happened? Did you just you ended up kind of going along with these sort of theories?
Well, how can I say? Physically, yes. Mentally, no.
Yeah.
Well, mentally, no, but then sort of feeling lots of anxiety and not knowing how to express that.
Yeah.
And also feeling helpless because I was brought up to believe that once you get married, you're married for life. And you don't question your husband, you do as you're told. And if you're a nice girl and a submissive wife, well, then you'll have a happy marriage.
Yeah.
But it just seemed to me that the more I tried to be the nice girl and the submissive wife and do all the right things, the less happy I was. Like I didn't feel happy inside. I wasn't fulfilled. And he was just basically taking advantage of my good nature.
Yeah.
And so eventually what he did was because the little pebble had told people that the Virgin Mary gave him personal messages for people. People could write letters. So this is a very ingenious way of the way he controlled people. He said that the Virgin Mary, if people wrote letters with questions, well, then they could give them to the little pebble, and the little pebble would ask the Virgin Mary, and then the Virgin Mary would answer them.
Right.
But obviously, he was the one that was just reading these letters and then just answering them himself.
Yeah.
And it was a very ingenious way of being able to know people's private thoughts and feelings and also be able to control them and manipulate them. Yeah. Basically, Tony, my ex-husband, wrote a letter to the Virgin Mary through Cam, and he wrote back and said that the Virgin Mary had told us that we needed to move to Nowra, which is on the south coast of New South Wales, and that was 16 hours drive away from Melbourne in another state. And so we were to sell everything up and move there. So basically Tony rang up the real estate agent and got a for sale sign put on the front of the house. And I did not agree. I actually I actually did speak up then, and I said I didn't like this. It didn't make me feel good,
Yeah.
and he basically got angry with me and said, "Well, if I would only just give up my own will and do what Our Lady wanted, well, then everything would be fine." And so that's what we did. The house got sold, everything got packed up, and then we moved up there. And I just felt, to be honest, I felt sick. I felt sick because we
Yeah.
we pulled up to a property that was 40 acres. It was an old caravan park, and it was surrounded by barbed wire fences. It had big padlock gates on the front, and it looked derelict. It was dusty. It honestly made me feel sick. I did not want to bring my children up. At that point, I had four little kids,
Mm.
aged, what was it, 1990, early 97. So I had four children under 7.
Wow. Who was there when you arrived to this place?
There was already, well, at that point, there was probably about, let me think, there was probably about 140 people living there already.
Yeah. Wow.
And then because the little pebble had predicted that in June 1997 there was supposedly a comet that was going to hit the Earth and knock it off its axis. It was going to be the first of many chastisements or punishments. Um, there was an influx of people that came from around the world. There was some from Canada. There was a whole lot from New Zealand. Um, there was some from somewhere else, I can't remember. But in the end, there was 180 people living there.
Right. How did it feel being around those people? Was there some people that you got on with? Did you feel comfortable with some of those people, or what were your early experiences like?
Well, initially I thought, well, firstly, I didn't feel good being there. I hated it on site. I did not want to bring my kids up there. But then I thought, okay, I was never one to be like, how can I say, all depressed. And I'm not, I'm not being critical of anybody who is depressed and lock themselves away, but that just wasn't my personality.
Sure.
I did not want my kids, even if I wasn't happy with the situation, I didn't want my kids to be looking at their mum thinking, oh, she's all sad and she's locking herself away. I just didn't want to be like that. I wanted to be
Yeah.
so much different to my mum. And I wanted my kids to know a happy mum. And
Yeah.
so I and I also thought too that if I sacrificed my happiness for a few years, Tony would see the futility of living there, that it would just lead to nothing. And that it wasn't going to be his, because he moved there with the idea that he was going to be truly happy and truly settled, which of course we all know isn't going to happen. If you're not happy on the inside, it's not going to happen any on the outside.
Yeah.
Um, and so I thought that if I sacrificed my happiness for him for a few years, well, then he would see the futility of it and want to move on. But that didn't happen. So initially, I was, I am a happy girl by nature. I am an extrovert to a point. But I quickly got myself into trouble because I asked too many questions.
Right.
Firstly, because obviously, if you're brought up strict Catholic, you do not have sex outside of marriage and you do not get pregnant outside of marriage.
Yeah.
And one of the first new people to arrive was a 17-year-old girl who was quite clearly pregnant
Yeah.
with no husband. So I asked the question, oh, so who is the father of her baby? And they're all going, shh, shh. We don't ask those questions. The baby is mystical. And I'm thinking, yeah, sure it is. So I learnt then very quickly to keep my mouth shut and my eyes and ears open.
Right.
And so I just kind of, because at that point I still had not got any confidence or enough confidence to be able to just say it, because I did fear repercussions. I didn't know what exactly, but I did think that it wouldn't be a good thing to be asking questions.
Was that the first kind of
So,
alarm bell where you felt actually there's something not right going on in this environment and that maybe things are a bit more sinister than what they had originally seemed?
well, I had a bad feeling about it from the very beginning, but I could not describe it.
Yeah.
Um, so when I asked the question and then was told to shush, over the next probably that was June 97. So between June 97 and January 2000, there were a few 17-year-old girls that had babies, and apparently they were mystical. And I was trying to get my head around it. And like I said to you, I learned to keep my mouth shut and my eyes and ears open. And I noticed that that the little Pebble would be seen with his arm around some girls. And even though Tony had said to him that it didn't look good, it wasn't a good, it wasn't good for a leader of a supposed religious community to be doing that. He sort of brushed Tony off and said, "Oh, no," because he was of German origin, the leader, Little Pebble. He said, "Oh, no, it's a German thing. We just love everybody." But in January 2000, there was one girl that gave birth, like yet another 17-year-old that gave birth to a baby. And I wish I could remember what the little Pebble wrote on the whiteboard. There was a whiteboard inside of the chapel,
Yeah.
and all the notices were written on there. And the way he wrote the notice of the birth of that baby made it just sounded like a husband, a loving husband, writing about the birth of his child. And all of a sudden it hit me. I went, internally I'm going, oh my God, he's sleeping with these girls.
Yeah.
And I was horrified, I was disgusted, and I was angry.
Yeah.
I was so angry. I was that angry. I felt this anger just rise up inside of me. And I felt so angry that if he was to cross my path, I felt like I would punch him.
Yeah.
And like I'd not felt anger like that forever.
Yeah.
Like I'd never felt that anger. And I went home to Tony and I said to him, the little Pebble is sleeping with these women and he's getting these girls pregnant and it's wrong. Like for me at that point in time, like here in Australia, the age of consent, well, at least at that time, was 16.
Yeah.
Now, these girls were 17 when they were having the babies, but he was already married for the second time. He'd already had 4 children with his first wife. I'm not sure, he ended up by having 6 children with his second wife. But he was in his mid-40s and he's having sex with these girls. It's disgusting. And that was really what got me.
Yeah.
And so I said to Tony, this is wrong and I don't want to be here anymore. I'm done. And
it must have taken a lot for you to assert yourself in that way, particularly because your husband had control over you. He was the one who called the shots in your relationship.
Yeah, exactly. But I just felt this, it was, even now I can remember, it was just awful. It was so much anger. And I literally, whenever I saw the little Pebble, like in public, I would literally turn around and walk another way. I just couldn't.
I wonder if you felt all of that anger because you were that 17-year-old girl originally when you were growing up and you'd been around a man who was kind of not necessarily doing the same, but as you mentioned, there was similarities. I wonder if the anger was so intense because the situation seemed familiar to you.
That's a very good question. I have no idea. But all I know is I was mad as a hornet. And Tony said to me, when I said I wanted to move, he said, no, the little Pebble has permission from Our Lady to do this and we're not moving. And I just, at that time, we never shared a bank account. So I had no money. I had no friends. I had no resources. I could not do anything. And at that point in time, I was pregnant with number 7.
Yeah. Wow.
With number 7. So where was I going to go? What was I going to do? I had no idea. I had never rented on my own. I'd never done any of these things. I had no flipping idea.
Yeah.
So then I thought I would just, how can I say, buckle down, and I kind of mentally retreated. So I mentally started to sort of cut myself off from the community, yet still be seen to be doing the right thing, so
Yeah.
then you don't get repercussions. Because at that time there was another lady that was actually more vocal than me. Like she was older than me, and she was more vocal and much more worldly. She'd grown up more normally, and I noticed that people did not speak very well of her, and they gave her a hard time,
Yeah.
and they would kind of pick on her. So I thought, well, I admired what she was doing and I agreed with what she said, but I also did not know how to actually like support her
Yeah.
doing that. So I just thought, okay, at that time I was still busy having babies, and I didn't know how I was going to, between, in all, I spent about 10 years there, and basically we were preparing for the end of the world every 6 months.
Yeah.
So between babies and preparing for the end of the world and saying lots of prayers and sacrificing, there's kind of not a lot else that goes on in your brain.
Yeah.
But then it came into May 2004, and I was pregnant with my youngest child, and Tony decided that he wanted to be a married priest against my will. Now, it had been specifically said in public that if any married man wanted to be a married priest, he had to ask the permission of his wife, and she had to say yes. I mean, she had to actually give permission. If she said no, he needed to abide by it. Well, Tony didn't ask me because he knew I'd say no, and he decided to do it behind my back. And I found out only about 10 days beforehand, and I felt betrayed, I felt angry, I felt really upset. I felt completely betrayed by the little pebble and also the priest that was with him, because I felt like they should have been looking out for, they kept on saying that you need to do the right thing, and yet here they weren't doing it.
Yeah.
And I kicked up such a shindy that he pulled back and decided not to do it. But I felt so much pressure and guilt from everybody else that I gave in just a few days beforehand. But I was devastated. I honestly felt, I can't even describe, I guess the thing that, like at the time, there's that line out of the Bible that says the lamb led to the slaughterhouse.
Yeah.
That's how I felt. I don't know how else to describe it, to be honest. And
What was the worst
so
part of that betrayal for you?
Well, for me, I felt like, well, firstly, he was basically treating us like shit, because he was, he wanted to have all these children,
Yeah.
but he didn't want to help provide for them. He didn't look after them. So he emotionally wasn't there. He wasn't emotionally there for me or for the children. He didn't want to help with them physically. And the thing was too, he was an online gambler. He gambled away $250,000 over 3 years.
Wow.
And I'm thinking to myself, so you're doing that here at home, but then you want to be like, portray yourself as some sort of holy priest saying all these prayers and dressing in all these beautiful robes.
Yeah.
Like, I do not like the hypocrisy of that.
Yeah.
And so, and I just thought to myself, and you'll be hearing people's confessions. I just, like, there was just, what about that is right? There's nothing about that that's right. And so that's why I kicked up such a shindy. But see, the thing is too that I was the only one in that community of 180 people that thought that there was something wrong with that. There was not anybody else. And what I hated that night when it happened, where they had the ceremony, it was like everybody else was just going, "Oh, don't worry, you'll soon get used to Our Lady's will. You know, if only you would just be submissive and just accept what Our Lady says." Like no one even bothered to have any understanding, any empathy, or even try to comfort me or anything. Like no one understood. I felt completely and utterly alone.
Yeah.
Like utterly. Physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Alone. And
Wow.
so then it would have been probably, let me think, 3 months later, I decided that I knew, because Tony never had a trust of banks. He hated banks. And so he would always draw all the money out in cash. And I knew he hid it in the cupboard somewhere. I speak about this in my TEDx Norwich talk. And at that time, he was working away for 3 days a week with a friend of ours, about 3 hours away. And I have no idea how it got into my head or why. But I knew that he drew out all the money out of the bank account and hid it in the wardrobe somewhere. So I waited so my youngest was probably 3 months old, and I waited until Tony was gone one day, and I went searching for it. And at first I only found probably a few $100s.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, but there has to be more in here, because he was feeding his gambling habit somehow. And anyway, I turned that wardrobe inside out, and I ended up by finding $20,000, 20,000
Wow.
Australian dollars. And I'd never
Wow.
seen so much money in my life. And I remember exactly where I was sitting. I was sitting on the floor of that bedroom with just these piles because I was counting it out. And I was just trying to make sure I didn't make a mistake. I had these piles of notes around me. And I thought, I had no bank account. So I thought, what am I going to do with this? Because I don't want to give it to him.
Yeah.
So I got an old biscuit tin and I put all the notes inside. I taped it up, and then I went out into the bush, because our house was backing onto bushland. And I got a shovel out of the shed, and I dug a big hole in the bush and I buried it.
Wow. Were you scared of him finding that you'd found the money?
Yes, because then he came back 3 days later and he clearly went to the wardrobe. By that time, my youngest was 3 months old. I was caught up with, because I had 8 kids aged 14 and under. So you can imagine I was pretty busy. And so I was changing the baby's nappy, and he came into the lounge room and he said, "Where's the money?" And because it had already been 3 days since I'd done it, and he'd only just come back, and then here I was caught up with babies and food and washing and everything else. I said, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "The money out of the cupboard." And then I thought, oh, I see. Right, now I get it. He's missing the money. And I just said, "Oh, it's gone." And he goes, "Gone where?" And I said, "Well, it's just gone. You can't have it."
Wow.
And
Were you scared at this point,
I
standing up to
was.
him in this way?
I remember I was all shaking. I was shaking on the inside. I was shaking on the outside. Well, I was trying very hard not to shake on the outside.
Yeah, it's
But
quite an assertive mood for a woman who had to be so submissive up to until this point.
I know, but it was a point of no return, Becky. Like
Yeah.
I had gone one step too far, per se, too
Yeah.
far into being me, and
Yeah.
I couldn't go back.
Yeah.
I couldn't go back then. And so then, see, at the same time, I also made the decision that I did not like what they were doing doctrinally. So they were breaking the rules of the Catholic Church. On that one hand, they're telling us, they're standing up there at the pulpit on the Sundays going, "You must abide by the rules of the Catholic Church, otherwise the Catholic Church isn't going to take us seriously." But then behind the scenes, they're breaking all the rules of the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was very Catholic minded, and I pointed that out to them, and they didn't like it.
Yeah.
So I decided that I would stop attending church on the property and go to the local church.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an extremely brave move because we had been told that if we went to church on the outside, well, then the priests would know where we came from. They would literally like name and shame us from the pulpit.
Mm-hmm.
They would refuse us Holy Communion, and like you just basically be hounded out of the church.
Yeah.
So this was such a brave. This was huge.
Did you believe that information to be true?
I did at the time.
Yeah.
Yes, I really did. So for me to actually fully believe that, yet get all of my kids ready for church on Sundays, myself, all 8 of them, aged 14
Yeah.
down to
Wow. What a
0.
mission.
Mm-hmm. And then drive them all 20 minutes into the church, into the local parish church. And I was terrified.
Yeah.
I literally, I slunk into that back seat, back pew of the church. And I mean, there was no doubting where I came from because I had, you know, myself and then my 5 daughters all had hats or scarves over our heads. And,
Yeah.
you know, I was dressed like I came from there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was terrified. I was shaking in my boots. I barely raised my head. I tried to keep all of them really quiet.
Yeah.
And I didn't go to Holy Communion on purpose because I thought I'm going to be named and shamed publicly.
Wow.
And then I waited until everybody had gone out of the church. Would you believe there were parishioners that purposely passed by my seat? They put a hand on my shoulder and they said, "Welcome, we're so glad to see you." And I'm like,
Oh.
are you serious?
Wow. It wasn't what you were expecting.
It was not what. And then I waited for a suitable amount of time because I thought, okay, everybody's gone out of the church. I'll wait and, you know, to make sure that the priest has gone too. And I came out and the priest was waiting. And he shook my hand and he said, "Oh, hi, welcome. I'm Father Pat." He said, "I'm so glad
Lovely.
to see you here and I'd love to see you here again." And I nearly fell over.
Wow. What a
I couldn't.
welcoming.
I know. But then I started to realize then that I was being fed a whole lot of lies by the little pebble, and that actually the priests in the local parish were extremely happy to see me.
Yeah.
And I wrote about it in my book. I received, to be honest, in that diocese, I myself and other people who left the cult were treated beautifully.
Amazing.
Like the bishop at the time and also the priests in that area were just true priests and a bishop. Like they just really cared for the flock and they honestly cared about the people and they weren't just caring about like their souls, but they were caring about the whole person.
Yeah.
And that was, I cannot speak highly enough of the bishop at that time and the priests, honestly.
How did you come to end up leaving the cult?
Well, as I mentioned just before, I challenged the leader on doctrinal issues, and just before that, he had been arrested for pedophilia,
Yeah.
and then I started writing the letters, but see, he was gutless and spineless because rather than just tip us out or confront me, he was paying the mortgage on the house that we were living in. So he decided to, instead of paying the mortgage, he was funneling that money into his court case. So that, 18 months? So over 18 months, that brought about a mortgage repossession. So I had the sheriff show up on my doorstep in August 2006 telling me that I had 12 days to leave.
Gosh.
And it was not traumatic, I'm telling you that now. I was so happy. I was so happy. I literally went, "Oh my God, I am so happy that you're saying this. Tell me what to do." I don't think he was quite expecting that, that reaction.
Like the happiest reaction he has ever got.
Yeah. And then I found a place, and then 12 days later when he came back, he had to come back, and he said to me, he came and saw me, and he said, "Oh, have you got everything out of the house?" He said, "I'll walk with you around the house to make sure you've got everything." He said, "I need to change all the locks, and I need to post my notices on the inside of the windows." I said, "Oh, don't waste your time and money changing all the locks. Look, here you go." I gave him a handful of keys. I said, "Here's a handful of keys." I said, "I never want to come back to this place again. Don't, save yourself some time and money."
He must have been quite confused.
He must have been, yeah.
What was
Yeah.
happening with your husband at that point? Did you talk about what was going to happen and where you were supposed to go to?
Hell no, because he wasn't interested. Um, he was hoping that a miracle would happen and we wouldn't have to leave.
Yeah.
But I did not give one iota what he thought. I was taking this opportunity with both of my hands, and I was moving. I did not care, come hell or high water. The kids and I were getting out of there.
Yeah.
I mean, we all had to leave as a family, but he was not happy because I had been a strong wife. How
Yeah.
dare I? I'd gone completely against the Catholic standard,
Yeah.
and I had taken charge, and how dare I?
And what happened next?
Well, we moved to a rental, just like in the township itself. And yes, we were free of the cult, and we were free of the constant fear and indoctrination of the world ending. But to be honest, it's been, this year's 2020, so it's like 14 years since I left.
Yeah.
And it's really only in the last probably 8 years that I've had, I don't know how to describe it exactly, but it's like I've had rapid peelings of layers that have just come away, and I've understood it much more.
Yeah.
But for me, when I first moved, I was like, it was relief because I knew that I was free of people, um, like, how can I say, like spying on me,
Yeah.
wanting to know my business. I
Controlling
was
you?
free, yeah, free of, like routine, the prayer routine. And because I mean, at that time too, we had to attend prayers 3 times a day, and we ate meals together. We had 2 meals a day together. I hated that. Um, it was very, stifling.
Yeah.
And but the thing is, I was physically free, but there was 32 years of indoctrination.
Yeah. Psychologically, you weren't free yet.
No, I wasn't, because I'd moved from the cult, but then I was still doing all the same things that I've been brought up with. I was still going to mass on Sundays and taking all of my kids with me.
Yeah.
I was still forcing them to say prayers. I was still dressing the same. I was still thinking the same. There was still, it was same but different.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. It was it was you had some freedom, but actually you knew no different because of the life you'd
exactly.
lived.
So, but I do remember that there came a day not so long afterwards where I realised that I would lose my children. And when I say that, I didn't think that anybody would take the children from me. But one day I had like a light bulb moment where I knew that my kids would turn 18 and they would leave home and
Yeah,
not want to come back,
yeah,
because their mum would still be still so strict and old fashioned and weird.
yeah,
And ultimately, the ultimately my biggest driver for leaving that cult was that I wanted all of my kids to be fierce. I wanted them to be independent. I wanted them to be free. I wanted them to live life like I had not had the opportunity to live.
Yeah.
I wanted them to be educated. I wanted them to be able to do whatever they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I just knew that if I did not change totally from the inside out, well then how could I be an example to them?
Yeah. It's
And
amazing that
especially my
you
daughters.
could step back and really consider your children in that way. And it was so different to how you'd been brought up. You didn't have a mom who was able to do that. But despite all of these behaviors that were so deeply ingrained in ways of being, you thought of your children and essentially put them first.
I did. I had to though. I had 5 daughters. I did not want them to grow up like I did, like I had. I
Yeah.
didn't want them to be stifled. I didn't want them to be forced to be submissive, to not be normal, to not have opportunities, to not be educated.
Yeah.
I wanted them to have all of that, and if it meant that I had to change, well then I was damn well going to do it, and I
Yeah.
did. And it was not long after, it was probably a little over a year after I left the cult that I divorced Tony.
Yeah.
And um, honestly, the kids said to me, it was like they said the day that he moved out permanently was the best thing. Because they felt like they could bring their friends, over, that it was actually a home, that, I was not, well, somewhat normal. And for me, I just knew, like, it was really hard for me because I knew too that I needed to change in order to be able to be normal, and I wanted to be. And the thing was that I was meeting other mothers who were the same age as me, and like they had, they'd lived through the 80s. They knew all the fashion, the movies, the music. I knew none of that.
Wow.
They had traveled, they had been to university, they'd had boyfriends, they'd had sex before marriage. Like, I'd not had any of these things. And
It must have been very difficult for you to make friends because of how different you were and how little you could relate to in terms of the way that their lives were.
well, see, that was another thing, and this is what I have found in speaking to other people, especially women who have left cults, is that even though you didn't want to be a part of the group, you still feel shame, you still feel the humiliation of being associated with the group, and you feel really backward.
Yeah.
And look, I was lucky enough that my kids were actually going to a Christian school that was very community based.
Yeah.
And the people there were very helpful, they were very understanding, and they literally welcomed myself and my kids into their community. And so I didn't have it as bad as some other people,
Yeah.
have had it. And there were a couple of people, a couple of women in particular, that really helped me. They kind of took me under their wing and helped me to become more normal.
Yeah.
And like when I went out, they would sort of cover for me. Like
Yeah.
if someone said to me, "Oh, you don't, oh, this is a fantastic 80s song. Don't you know the words to it?" Kathy would just sort of pipe up and just go, "Oh, no, no." And she'd say, she'd make up something to try and
Yeah.
smooth it over so that I wouldn't look like an idiot. And it was just, but the thing was that it was hard for me. And, now when I speak about it, I recently connected with a Jewish lady in Montreal, can you believe it, who had watched one of my TEDx talks, and like she said, "Oh my God, I need to meet this girl because what she describes is what I felt."
Yeah.
And I need, that's why I share my story, because there are other people out there, men and women, who feel the same way, who have had the
Yeah.
same problems when they've left a strict group or a
Yeah.
strict family or a strict upbringing. And how do you say this to people who don't understand, who have no idea? It is
It's
really hard.
it's not a simple story to explain because of the depth and how long it went on for, and that was your life for such a long
Mm,
period of time. What was it
mm.
like to tell Tony that you wanted a divorce?
Um, Well, it was interesting because at that time there was another that I'd connected with another lady who had actually left the cult. She was much older than me, and she'd left a few years before, and she'd sort of heard on the grapevine that I'd left, and she'd seen a lawyer in order to be able to get back some money from the Little Pebble. And so I went to see that same lawyer, and I didn't end up by getting any money back. But anyway, the first time Tony and I went together, and then, but Tony was never motivated to see things through. But I was always a people person, and I quite liked, Phil seemed to just talk, he seemed to talk sense, whatever. So I went back to see him again. And one day, on one occasion when I went to see him to see how it was going, with getting money back from the Little Pebble, he just looked at me and he said, "The marriage is over, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, it is." And he said, "You do realise that you can get a divorce in like 6 weeks." And I went, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah." He said, "Here, I'll print off the papers for you. You go away and print them and fill them out and bring them back to me, and I'll file them for you." And this was in November. And he said, "I'll file them for you, and you'll be one of the first cases up in January. You'll have a divorce in January." I said, "Serious?" And he goes, "Yeah." I went, "All right." So I did that. And
Wow.
the thing is that we hadn't been having, like, we were separated under one roof, and we hadn't been having sex for a long time. So it was, it was legit. And so anyway, I took the papers home, and like, obviously Tony needed to sign them. And I was thinking to myself, how am I going to get him to sign them? And I thought, well, there's no point in trying to have this nice talk, because that's never going to go well. I thought, what I'll do is I'll wait until he comes, and I'll just say, "You need to sign this," and just do it. And so I did. And then he basically sat there and he said, "I'm not signing it." And he hates women that swear. So I basically said, "Okay, I don't give a shit. It's going to happen anyway." And I walked off. And then he realised that the horse had already bolted. What was he going to do? I was going to go through with it, whether he signed it or not.
Yeah.
So he signed it.
Wow. Well done.
There you go. Yes.
What I'd just like to have a bit of like a highlight of kind of what has life been like since that then, and also how's your life now?
Well, wow. It's been light and day.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, because I suppose the more because when I first left, I knew I was socially and educationally backward, so I was going to do everything I could to try and educate myself. And so I did a lot of reading of biographies, autobiographies. I used to, when I was invited out, I would actually not join in the conversation very much because I didn't know what to say. So I would listen to conversations, watch people's reactions. I, realised pretty quick that religion, money, and politics are not good subjects because they seem to.
Did you have a lot of social anxiety in those days because of not being able to contribute to the conversations very well?
Well, when I look back, I was very anxious,
Yeah.
but I did not know that at the time.
Yeah.
I was good at hiding it, but then, over time, I got to know more. I looked at other mothers and I saw how free and easy they were. They were laughing. They were having opinions. They were having conversations. They were dressed in jeans. They were dressed in singlet tops. They were just, some of them had really short hair. They used to wear earrings, like all of these things.
Yeah.
I was 38 years old before I owned my first pair of jeans, got my ears pierced, and wore a bikini. I was 36 when I left and 38 when I had my first pair of jeans.
And you wrote a book as well?
Yes, I did. So this is my book.
Amazing.
And that is me on the cover.
Amazing. So Lessons from a Cult Survivor.
Yeah.
Excellent. Claire, you have had the most phenomenal life, and you've had two lives. You've had one that was just extraordinarily difficult for you, where you were so powerless, and it's amazing to see this powerful woman in front of me who has the freedom and who's so liberated and is learning. It's been such a pleasure speaking to you today. I've really enjoyed it.